Hello once again, boys and girls, and welcome to another of our online Bible studies. And I hope that you've been enjoying these. I know I've really been enjoying bringing them to you and looking forward to seeing you all again and hopefully very soon, but we'll just trust the Lord with all that. Now, today we don't have a Bible verse that we're going to be going over, but what we do have is one of my favorite Bible stories of all time, and I am extremely excited to bring this Bible story to you. Now, when we left David had just brought the Ark of the Covenant back into Jerusalem. You remember that? How they put it on a cart first, and that really wasn't God's way of doing it, and they had some real problems with that. And so then David did it the right way, and he got the Ark with the big long sticks, and they carried it into Jerusalem, and it was a big party, and everybody was celebrating. Well, then something happens not too long after this. David's sitting around, and he's perhaps thinking about the past. He's remembering his friend Jonathan, who was Saul's son, and he's thinking about all the things that God did to make him king. And David has a question, and he's wondering, is there anybody left of Saul's family, of that royal line of Saul? Is there anybody left that I can just do something nice for them? And so he starts asking questions, and somebody says, well, King, actually there's a guy here who is one of your servants, and his name is Ziba. And Ziba was actually a servant of King Saul before he was your servant. So David says, well, I want you to bring Ziba here, and I want to talk to him. So they bring Ziba in, and David says, is there anybody that you can think of that is remaining from Saul's family that I can do something kind for them? And Ziba says, well, as a matter of fact, Jonathan had a son, and he has a name that's kind of a weird name. As a matter of fact, it's one of the most weird names in all of the Bible, but it's a name that I want you to remember. It's a name that I want you to become familiar with. It's the name Mephibosheth. That's right, Mephibosheth. Jonathan had a son, and his name was Mephibosheth, and Ziba says to him, I know where he's living. And if you want to do something nice for somebody, he could really use that, and here's why. Because when Mephibosheth was only 5 years old, that's when Jonathan, his father, and Saul, his grandfather, were killed in battle. And that would be a terrible day. Can you imagine your dad and your grandfather both being killed on the same day? But it actually gets worse, a lot worse. You see, the Bible tells us that Mephibosheth was only 5 years old, and he had a nurse, somebody who was watching him, taking care of him, kind of like a nanny. And when they found out that the Philistines were winning the war, were winning the battle, and they found out that Saul and Jonathan had been killed, they ran in fear. They didn't know what the Philistines were going to do. They didn't know if they were going to come into the city where they were after they defeated the army. And so Mephibosheth's nanny scoops him up, and she starts to run away to get out. And when she does, she accidentally drops him. And he falls in such a way that he is injured. And the Bible tells us that from that day forward, Mephibosheth could not walk. He was injured in his back, perhaps, or in some way that he became lame on his feet, the Bible says. So think about this. Mephibosheth lost his father and his grandfather in the same day, and he also became a cripple. Can you imagine that? And so Ziba says, David, if you want to do something kind for somebody, I know somebody who could really use some kindness. It's Mephibosheth. And so David says, well, where does he live? Well, Ziba says he lives in a place that is a really unique place. It's called Lodabar. Lodabar actually means a place of low degree. Boys and girls, this was not a good place. As a matter of fact, Lodabar was not actually in a city. It was just outside of a city. It was considered a ghetto town. It was a place where socially unacceptable people were sent to live. People who weren't fun to be around, people who perhaps were very poor, or perhaps they were of a particular racial background that people didn't like, and whatever the reason would be, they were separated, they were segregated. And this is where Mephibosheth had to live. And so the name Lodabar means a place of no pasture. This was not a pretty place. This was not a bright place. This was not a place where you or I would want to live. This is a place of low degree. So think about this. Mephibosheth's father and grandfather have been killed. For years, he's been lame. And he lives in Lodabar. And Ziba says, look, King, if anybody can use a little bit of kindness, it's Mephibosheth. And so David sends for him. He says, all right, go get him and bring him here. And so Mephibosheth, of course, just sitting there in Lodabar, and one day a messenger shows up and he says, Mephibosheth, I have a message for you. The king, King David, wants to see you in the palace. Well, can you imagine all the things that are going through Mephibosheth's mind, right? Why does the king want to see me? Am I in trouble? Did I do something wrong? Is he still angry with my grandfather Saul for trying to kill him? Is he going to hurt me? Is he going to take my life? He didn't know. So Mephibosheth comes into the palace, and the Bible tells us that when he gets in David's presence, that he bows down and he falls on the ground and he bows before him. And he says to King David, I don't even know why you would call me. I'm worthless and I'm a dog. And David says, stand up, stand up. And Mephibosheth stands up and he says to him, are you Mephibosheth? He says, yeah, that's me. He said, are you the son of Jonathan, who was the son of Saul? And he says, yes, sir, that's me. And perhaps David explains to him that his father Jonathan was his best friend in the whole world. Well, that would make Mephibosheth feel a lot better, right? Well, okay, things are going in a good direction here, right? I don't think he wants to hurt me anymore, because if his best friend in the whole world was my dad, that's a good thing. And then David says something to Mephibosheth. He says, I want to do something for you, for Jonathan, your father's sake. And he begins to explain to Mephibosheth all that he's going to do for him. And if it was anything like me, if I was Mephibosheth, I don't think my mind could have comprehended it. David begins to tell him that the land that belonged to Saul and to Jonathan, he was going to give that land back to Mephibosheth. Now, he's a cripple. He can't walk. So it would be impossible for him to do anything with that land. So David goes on further and he says, but not only am I going to give you the land, but this man here, his name is Ziba. And I don't know if you know this, but he was actually a servant of Saul, your grandfather. And so I'm going to make him your servant. And him and his sons and all of his servants are going to work all the land for you, and they're going to prepare everything, and they're going to take care of it, and they're going to serve you. Whatever you want, they'll get it for you. And basically, they belong to you now. Well, the Bible says that Ziba had 15 sons, and he had 20 servants. So 15 plus 20, right? That's 35. Plus Ziba himself, that's 36. So he's got 36 people waiting on him hand and foot, whatever he needs. Working the land, planting the garden, harvesting the crops. Now, think about this. Mephibosheth, in one day, goes from this guy who's living in a place that nobody really wants to live, to being brought to the king's palace and told, I'm going to give you this big piece of land, and I'm going to give you all of these servants to work it. I mean, his mind is probably just going, I can't even imagine this is happening. It seems like a dream. He's like pinching himself. Is this real? But then the king says one more thing. David says to him, Mephibosheth, I've given you this land, and I've given you these servants, but there's one final thing that I want for you, and that is this. I want you to eat at my table for the rest of your life. I want you to be just like my son. I know that you're Jonathan's son, and I know that your father is no longer living. I know he was killed in battle. And so Mephibosheth, basically, I want to adopt you. And you don't ever have to worry about anything else again. I'll take care of all of your needs. I'll take care of all of the things that you might want. And you can eat at my table, and you can be right here in the palace whenever you want to be. If you want to go to the land that you've been given, go ahead and go there. But he says, every meal that you eat, I want you to eat it right here with me. Now, can you imagine what's going through Mephibosheth's mind? Again, he probably is finding it hard to believe that this is even really happening. And so he asks the king a question, which I think is a natural question to ask. He says, King, why? Why are you doing this? I'm a nobody. Now, at one time, he was a somebody. At one time, he was the grandson of the king. But now he's a lame man living in Lodabar with nothing. So he says to David, David, why? Why are you doing this for me? And David gives him this answer. He says, I'm doing it for Jonathan, your father's sake. That reminds me of a verse, young people. The Bible says in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse number 32, be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. You see, David and Mephibosheth are a great picture of me and God. You see, when I came to God and I asked him to forgive me of my sin, he didn't have any reason to forgive me. I hadn't earned forgiveness of sin. I didn't deserve forgiveness of sin. But here's what the Bible says. The Bible says that God forgave my sin not because I'd earned it, but because Jesus earned it. Not because I deserved it, but because the work that Jesus did on the cross, that deserved the forgiveness of my sin. And so Mephibosheth says to David, I don't deserve any of this, so why are you doing it? And David said, I'm not doing it for you, I'm doing it for Jonathan. And boys and girls, if you've asked Jesus into your heart, if you have told God that you're a sinner and you've put your faith in the work that Jesus did on the cross as a payment for your sin, if you've ever come to God and said, God, I'm a sinner and I deserve to die and go to hell, but I believe that Jesus loved me and he died for me, and you've put your faith in him, then he's saved you. He's forgiven your sin. But he didn't do it because you deserved it, and he did not forgive my sin because I deserved it. He gave us this wonderful gift because Jesus deserved it. Now, there's one final thing about the story of Mephibosheth that the Bible tells us, and it's pretty interesting. It says that Mephibosheth stayed there in the palace and he ate with the king at his table every meal, and then it ends by saying this, and he was lame on his feet. Now, we already knew that. We already knew that he was lame, and we knew that he wasn't going to be healed, right? So why does the Bible remind us again that he was lame on his feet? I think it's this. I think the Bible wants to remind you and remind me that even with all of the good things that God has given to us, and by the way, he has really blessed us, hasn't he? But even with all of those things, we still need him every day, don't we? Mephibosheth had all of these things given to him. He had the land given to him and the servants given to him. He was able to eat at the king's table, but he was still lame on his feet. He still needed help every day to get where he was supposed to go and to do the things that he needed to do. And so may God remind you and remind me that even though he's saved us, we still need him every day. Perhaps you've never made that decision. Maybe you've never asked Jesus to forgive your sin. Maybe you've never put your faith in him. I want you to know, today would be the day to do that, at this moment. And you say, why would God ever forgive me? I didn't do anything to earn it. That's right, and you never could. But he does not forgive us because of us. He forgives us for Jesus' sake. Remember, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. This is one of my favorite stories in all the Bible, the story of David and Mephibosheth. I look forward to being with you next week. Until then, I'm praying for you, and may God bless you.